As you can see, it's a horrible day outside, lovely grey sky, drops of rain against the window. Pretty awful, really. Hope the weather doesn't get any worse and won't be able to get into work. So, it's lucky that I have little things like my coffee cup here. Things to remind me of home around the desk, or remind me of work. A little ornament there, just to remind me of happier times. Times with my family, times with my wife, how happy we are. And the little things that really make life maybe a little bit more bearable. Well, on to today's poem then. Today we're going to cover Cozy Apologia from the GCSE Poetry Anthology, and the poems by Rita Dove. We're going to look at, as normal, the three different assessment criteria. That is Assessment Objective 1, the meaning of the poem, Assessment Objective 2, its language and how it creates effects, and of course Assessment Objective 3, which is the context of the poem, how the time it was written and who it was written by influences the language choices made. Now, the poem itself is based around the attack of a hurricane, Hurricane Floyd, and this is the weather broadcast taken from the time.
A little weaker now, actually a fair amount weaker than it was at this time yesterday. It's gone from 155 to 125 in terms of max winds, but it's still over the warm Gulf Stream. In fact, it's got the warmest waters yet to go over. And so we can't take that and use that as an argument to relax our vigil. Folks along the Carolina coast have to take this one very seriously. Here's what it looks like on our radar for you, and you can see the very well-defined eye. Heavy rains are falling all along the coast now. The strongest winds, though, are very near the center of the storm, and so that obviously is critical as to where that landfall will be. And we think it will be probably in this territory, somewhere north of the North-South Carolina border, and toward the Outer Banks. And that is the territory, especially the beaches, that will really get quite a storm. But we also have some tremendous waves, even as high as 50 feet offshore, and there will be quite a bit of beach erosion and that kind of thing. Here's our, as far as some inland cities are concerned, even up to New York City and Boston. Of course, the worst in Boston will come tomorrow night on into Friday, but there'll be enough rain to cause some flooding and enough wind. All of these wind speeds actually enough to cause considerable tree damage and power outages even in the big cities. The worst of the storm, obviously, though, will be right on the coast and right on the beaches. Here's our projected window of movement, and you can see we're expecting it to come on to the North Carolina coast. That would be tomorrow morning, and then head northward. Now, when it does hit the coast, it will weaken to some extent, but you can also see on that window of movement we are anticipating over the water here east of Virginia Beach. So as it continues to travel northward toward maybe eastern Long Island or Cape Cod or just offshore there, it may still contain hurricane-force winds.
But Dr. Joe, once it hits the mid-Atlantic like that, is the water warm enough for it to re-energize?
Well, it's not warm enough, David, if you're talking about off Virginia and off New Jersey and New York. It's not warm enough to energize a Category 4 hurricane, but it is warm enough to maintain hurricane strength, maybe Category 1 of 70 to 80 miles per hour, and that would be obviously a very significant storm.
Dr. Joe Sobel with the very latest on Floyd's movement and the MSNBC Weather Center. Thanks very much.
Rita Dove herself, as you can see from the map there, resides in Virginia, and the hurricane was making its way up the coast here, so she was sitting at home in her office just waiting for this hurricane to approach her house. She then lives on the east coast of America. She's married to Fred Vebern, a writer, and it's her she's sharing her house with as she awaits Hurricane Floyd's approach. She's lived in Virginia since 1989. Hurricane Floyd hit in 1999 after devastating the Bahamas. The hurricane was the fourth worst in American history. The hurricane itself was deadly. 76 people died, and 51 of these were in North Carolina, just situated then a little bit south of Virginia. That meant as the people in Virginia sat there listening to the news broadcasts and listening to the weather forecast they were seeing on the news, They didn't know how bad the hurricane would be when it got to Virginia. They were worried that they too would be at risk when the hurricane made landfall there. This is an interview then with Dove herself, just explaining some of her influences.
It's different every time. And in fact, years ago, there was I did do something like that for a magazine where journalists actually followed me around and we tried to, but it's slightly different every time. My inspiration comes from everywhere. Just walking down the street, and I never know where it's going to come from. So I keep a notebook with me at all times. And the only criteria for anything making it into that notebook is if it stops me in my tracks for even an instant, if it catches my eye or my ear, you know, and I just write it down. That means there are recipes in there, you know, there are words, and sometimes there's a character description, or sometimes it's a line. And after that point, though, what happens is kind of odd. I work in fragments, in the sense that I'm not going to sit down and say, first line is this, and now I'm going to just write my way through it. I let the poem, it's like piecing it together like a pot. So I might have a line that I might write down on the middle of a page, and I still write things down with a pen or paper. I go to the computer when it gets too messy and use it like an elaborate typewriter because I print it out and then I mess it up again. But when I do sit down to write in my room, in my study, and I try to write at a certain time every night. I'm a night person. My best times are midnight to 6, actually. I'll leaf through my notebooks, and if something catches my eye and I feel like I want to transfer it from the notebook to the page, I do. And then comes this very strange process, which is difficult to describe, and that I'll write until I get stuck, or I can't go any further, or I'm boring myself, or whatever. And then I might go to another poem. I might go to another folder where there are other drafts of poems in various stages of completion. And the only way I have for keeping track of all this fragmentary stuff is by color. And I have different colored folders, red folders, blue, yellow. So I might go into my study, let's say one evening, and say, I feel like the blue folder today. And I'll pick up the blue folder and see what's in there. So it's something that I've kind of worked at over the years, but the colors are only because I didn't want to put anything, I didn't want to file anything in a straight, you know, I think if you put something in a file that says war poems or love poems, that you already restrict the way in which the poem might move. If I put it in blue, it could be sad blue, it could be happy blue, it could be peaceful blue, but my mood at the moment when I'm about to work on that poem will tell me where I want to go. So it's an odd process, but I do lots of revisions, and I love to revise. So 30, 40 revisions is not unusual. At this stage, I do most of my revisions by myself until I reach a point where I either need to give it lots of time, because time is a great reviser too, you know, it's just months of putting it aside. Or I will show it, a lot of times I'll show it to my husband, who is a novelist. And as a prose writer, he has a totally different take on things. So he comes at it a different way. I yearn for those old days, you know, from graduate school where you go into a workshop and people would give you all these ideas and you take it away from you. But at this point, that it's not in the cards, so.
The poem then, Cozy Apologia, is set in an office as Rita Dove looks out the window at the weather around her and then makes connections with the things she holds dear. The clip in the background is a video of the hurricane itself. Cozy Apologia by Rita Dove. I could pick anything and think of you, this lamp, the wind still rain, the glossy blue my pen exudes. drying matte upon the page. I could choose any hero, any cause or age, and sure as shooting arrows to the heart, astride a dappled mare, legs braced as far apart as standing in silver stirrups will allow. There you'll be, with furrowed brow and chainmail glinting to set me free. One eye smiling, the other firm upon the enemy. This postmodern age is all business, compact discs and faxes, and do it now and take no risks event. Today a hurricane is nudging up the coast, oddly male, big, bad Floyd, who brings a host of daydreams, awkward reminiscences of teenage crushes on worthless boys, whose only talent was to kiss you senseless. They all had sissy names, Marcel, Percy, Dewey, were thin as licorice and as chewy, sweet with a dark and hollow centre. Floyd's, cussing up a storm, you're bunkered in your eyrie, I'm perched in mine. Twin desks, computers, hardwood floors, we're content, but fall short of divine. Still, it's embarrassing, this happiness. Who's satisfied simply with what's good for us? When has the ordinary ever been news? And yet, because nothing else will do to keep me from melancholy, call it blues, I will fill this stolen time with you. We're now going to look at the whole poem then and pick out some key things to mention about it. Please get a copy of your own to annotate and add notes to as we go. The title, Cozy Apologia, has a subheading for Fred, indicating the greatly personal nature of the poem for Rita's husband. The title itself is using simple and high-level language. A warm snuggle, which is what cozy means, versus a written defence, the Apologia. So the poem is a defence of coziness and comfort. The first line, I could pick anything and think of you, is filled with pronouns, I and you, making the poem more intimate and personal, as if it's written directly to her husband. She then goes on to list ordinary objects, such as the lamp and the pen. These ordinary objects suggest that love isn't special. This emphasises the autobiographical nature of the poem. We then have, further down in stanza 1, this reference to chainmail. Dove is comparing her husband to a knight, deliberately using a romantic cliché to suggest the traditional nature of her love. The poem uses rhyming couplets throughout to make the poem feel more simple and almost childlike, again emphasising the traditional nature of the love they share. You'll notice the structure notes are in blue and the language notes are now in white. Onward then to stanza 2. This represents then, in this first line, this postmodern age is all business, a change in topic. This creates a more conversational tone in the poem. We then have these elements of punctuation here, such as the comma after faxes, making us pause as if the relationship is being interrupted. It's as if she's talking and thinking about other things while she's writing it, as if the hurricane is a distraction from her love, or maybe her love is a distraction from the hurricane. She uses phrases like big bad Floyd to suggest the hurricane is like a bully. Simplistic language makes it sound almost comical. She's almost being sarcastic, as if Floyd and the danger it represents isn't really a danger at all. She begins to interrupt her rhyming here, as if the hurricane is interrupting her peaceful existence or her peaceful love that she shares with her husband. We then have her begin to poke fun at the sissy names hurricanes are often called. She lists off 3, Marcel, Percy, Dewey, as if the threat the hurricane poses is really childlike or insubstantial compared with the love she has for her husband. This hurricane will come and it will go, yet the love she has in her life will stay there forever. Onwards to stanza 3. She almost makes the hurricane sound rude, as if it's cussing up a storm, as if the hurricane, by coming in her direction, is swearing at her and interrupting her otherwise peaceful existence. Dove makes herself sound like a bird. I'm perched, being the word that we normally link to birds, a flying animal that need not fear the hurricane. It's as if she can fly away whenever she wanted to escape the danger. She references the fact that she and her husband are content or happy, but not godlike happy, the word divine there with a capital D. Divine contrasts with the ordinary language the poem uses, and this emphasised the special nature Dove feels for her partner, even though it is ordinary. She is referencing then that although they are not perfect, their love is true and it is pure. The rhyming changes by the end of the poem, as if Dove is aware of the effect the hurricane has on the world around her. This hurricane then perhaps is more serious than she first thought. The last line, I fill this stolen time with you, emphasises the danger of the impending hurricane and the love she has for her husband. You'll notice then, if you read the poem closely, there are lots of links to being male, either stereotypical images of male or the danger that a male represents. These all represent the role of a man in a woman's life in some way, which means the hurricane could be a metaphor for being stereotypically male. If you were to look at the poem, you would find quotes that match each of the pictures on the board. I would suggest spend some time labelling those quotes and think why that image of masculinity has been used. The basics of the poem then, to summarise. Who is it about? Well, it's about Dove in her office awaiting the arrival of Hurricane Floyd. What is it about? We've got Dove looking around her and seeing all the objects that remind her of her husband. She isn't scared of the hurricane as she knows her relationship is stronger. Why was it written? In the face of danger, Dove reflects on the normal nature of her love for her husband, and this makes her find humour in the storm. We're now going to go on then to look at 3 key quotes with some notes around them. These are the 3 that you might want to learn potentially and get used to writing about in the test. Quote number 1. Quote number 2. And quote number 3. If you look closely at the poem then for a higher level answer, you'll notice it uses lots of references to barriers. Dove felt that by writing the poem she was attempting to break these barriers down and give a more personal account of both love and the hurricane. We have then on one side of the glass, the window, the hurricane itself, trying to batter her house, trying to get in. On the other side of the glass we have her warmth at home. We also have the writing on the page. The barrier is the meaning those words actually represent. And then we have her husband's heart on the other side of that barrier. We have the role of men. Then we have the reference to how much times have changed since many of the stereotypes she mentions were used. And then we have the real man, the husband in her life, on the other side. We then have one side her memories of her life with her husband, the anger she feels towards the hurricane, and then the present, the unknownness of the future. And lastly, as perhaps in any poem, we have on one side the poet Rita Dove writing about her experiences. We have this poem that's been created from those experiences, and on the other we have ourselves as readers trying to work out then how she actually feels solely by looking at the words on the page. Now we're going to go on then to exam technique. We're going to look a bit about structure today. You'll notice then for Assessment Objective 2 that structure is frequently mentioned regardless of what grade you actually want to achieve. You must talk about structure and form. A question that I'm often asked is, well, what's the difference? What is structure and what is form? What is structure? The structure of a poem is how the writer has chosen to present their ideas. That might include the title, first line, last line, use of punctuation, any enjambment it uses. And then what is form? Well, that is the type of poem that you've been given. For example, the rules the poet appears to have followed. For example, the rules of a sonnet is that it must have 14 lines, it must have a set rhyme scheme, and must have 10 syllables per line. If I was to comment on why the poem might be a sonnet, that would be a reference to form. If I was talking about the punctuation use in a particular line, then that might qualify as structure. Here is an example then of how I might comment using the notes I've already made on this poem on structure. Notice my answer begins by commenting on how the structure begins. The poem starts off in rhyming couplets. After stanza 1, this changes. I'm telling the examiner, I know how the structure evolves through the poem. I realise that Dove has not used the same structure all the way through. You'll notice I've used some quotes in here just to back up what I'm saying. Most lines have 4 stresses, as, standing, in silver, stirrups, will allow. But some lines have 5 stresses. This post, most modern age, is all business, compact discs. The gradual breakdown of the rhyme scheme and the poet's irregular rhythm might also be said to imitate the oncoming storm. It's as if she's deliberately using structure to represent the danger and the anger of the storm itself. The speaker's memories become scattered just as Hurricane Floyd will scatter debris. We can see then that this follows a certain structure to start with, rhyming couplets, but that breaks down the closer the hurricane gets to the house. Dove then uses the way she uses her lines and her line length and her stresses to replicate her emotions. Most poets do the same thing. Notice there are no comments there on individual words being used. We're not saying why she uses the word silver, and we're not commenting on the fact that she's using references to compact discs. That would be a language comment. What we're doing here is looking at how the line is written and what rhyming or stresses we see within that line. If I was to look at the poem then and think about comparisons with other poems in the anthology, I might make a reference then to Living Space, as both poems study intimate parts of life in a dangerous situation, or I might look at the poem Afternoons, with its study of a place that's familiar and that we can all appreciate and perhaps connect with. Thank you very much then today for listening to this presentation on Cozy Apologia by Rita Dove.